This episode of Confronting the Line contains a trigger warning. There is talk of workplace abuse and strangulation that begins around the 38-minute marks and ends around the 43-minute mark. Please take care of yourself.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
Hello, and welcome back to Confronting the Line, where we explore the often blurry line between transformation and exploitation. This year, we're kind of taking a deep dive into the distinctions and practices, mostly in the self-help or human potential kind of movement. And really what we're looking at is both the dark side and the light side. When you come to the line, one of my favorite teachers taught me this a long time ago, when you come to the line, that's when you can see more. You can see it all. When you're just in the light or just in the dark, you don't see the other. You only see what you're in. So here at Confronting the Line, that's what we're committed to, stepping up to the line, looking, listening, and learning. So today, I'm super excited to have with us as a guest, Ann Betz. Ann and I have been chatting a little bit, and took us several months actually to kind of actually connect in person. We kept sort of talking, meeting through other people. So I'm just super excited to have you with us today. And I'm going to just read a little bit of your bio because I think it's so cool. But now I have you introduce yourself as well. Ann Betz is an expert in the neuroscience of human consciousness, coaching, and narcissistic abuse. You can already see why she's an expert on this show. Ann is the co-founder of BEabove Leadership and an expert on the intersection of neuroscience, coaching, trauma, and human transformation. And speaks, trains, and coaches internationally, and writes about neuroscience and coaching as well as relational trauma. And is also a published poet who loves cats, rain in the desert, and healthy relationships. And the other thing that Ann and I have in common is, and I'll have you tell a little bit of the story. So Ann, you worked at Landmark.
I did.
When it first was Landmark, right? Like early 90s. Gotcha. That's a little bit how we connected when my book came out, which was literally, guys, a year ago this Friday. Believe it or not, I can't believe it's gone by so quick. And Ann was one of the early readers and reached out and was like, "Hey, I want to talk about this," and has been I've been looking for people to talk about this with. So it was so exciting. So Ann, why don't you, just anything you want to let our audience know about who you are, and then we should probably start a little bit with your story as well, like your journey into your professional background.
Oh my gosh. Well, I just was so grateful for your book because I did the original S training when I was 18 years old. And I will tell you that was a while ago. That was a while ago. I know I look young, but it was a while ago. And I did that. And then I worked for Werner Erhard and Associates in New York City. And I did all of the deep dive assisting in Minneapolis, also New York, and then Minneapolis, and was very heavily involved for about 9 or 10 years in there in early young adulthood, which was sort of interesting. And I have some thoughts about how some of this impacts the young adult brain that is a little different than the older brain, because we're so busy trying to make sense of things at that point in our life. So has a particular...
Ooh, Tony, make note of that. So, for our audience, one of the reasons why I want to have Ann on is because I'm going to actually invite Ann to come and co-host some programs with me. And I just talked with somebody who had been involved since they were a child. I've actually talked with a number of people who did the S training or or even the forum after it became the forum as young people and as children. And they kind of they say this a very similar thing. And so we want to do a show.
Oh, I'd love to.
People have done that. And I'd love to have you. We'll definitely have you on to help.
Yeah, we'd love to talk about the impact of that, both good and bad. Again, it's the line, it's the benefit and the cost. Yeah. And so when your book came out, it was like something I hadn't thought about, although it lives in me. I spent a big chunk of my time there and learning and being indoctrinated and learning and all of that. But it reawoke a conversation that that wasn't complete for me. And the conversation was I in a cult? And so then your book was like, oh, I got that is going on the top of my Amazon list right now.
Like the question was such a shocker. I'm like, oh my gosh, this question is everywhere. And any of us who had any kind of leadership role dealt with it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So really, really helpful to get your take on that and to reopen the conversation and reopen a part of me that I think really has needed some healing, honestly. Even though I'd kind of put it aside for many years, there was the impact on me both positively that I can own and also, I know it took many, many years after leaving for my nervous system to actually recalibrate. I know, and that tells me that it wasn't all good. Because if it was all good, when we're just in just good experiences, loving experiences, you don't get that nervous system impact where you're on high alert, where you're walking on eggshells, or where you're quick to trigger and all of that. And I know that that took me probably about 10 years to get it mostly out of my system. So that's how I know there's something going on that is not okay, because otherwise you don't have that kind of response.
Yeah. I talked to a former staff member. I mean, just literally hundreds of people have called me since my book came out, and mostly former program leaders and staff, and not all from Landmark as an organization, but other LGAT type groups, LifeSpring, Context, Insight,
right?
Various, definitely lots of Scientology. But somebody shared with me, they were only on staff for like a couple years. But he asked me, he said, I still jump when the phone rings. Do you think that's PTSD? I'm like, pretty sure.
Absolutely.
Pretty sure.
Absolutely. Probably complex PTSD. Probably we'll just add a little C to the beginning of that.
Exactly.
Absolutely. It is. And I will just share with you just quickly, my business partner had the same thing from a job she was in. It wasn't from an LGAT, but it was from a boss who was very critical and very abusive. And she said she had for years the phone would ring and her whole system would jump.
Well, I think we had a whole culture of in a period in which sort of the no pain, no gain mentality, and a lot has been tolerated in the name of coaching, and a lot of abuse. And that was what was startling for me. I mean, I talk about it lightly in the book, but the book, I'm going like, it's like an amuse-bouche of the story. It's such a little thing.
You
But
opened the door, though. You opened the door. And I think you've learned a lot even since writing the book, is my sense of things. It's like
massive.
The whole thing blew open and you opened the door to it. And, that is just such a...
I really had no idea. I always joke, I'm like, I went into Narnia, when they opened the door in the back there. I'm like, what?
Right.
But I think there was, in groups like Landmark, who in the name of human performance said a lot of things were okay that we now know are not okay. And, some of that was normal, part of the culture. I don't really think it's fair to lay all the blame at Landmark's door or LifeSpring's door or anything like that. I think culturally, I mean, just like it used to be totally, of course you could spank your child anywhere over anything, anytime. And now we know maybe that's not so good. And to me, it's a lot of that. But this culture, this idea, that's what we were told with Warner right away when we were going to be working in the inner sanctum. We got kind of an orientation, and we were told, you're going to hear him be really harsh with people. And we were told two things. One major thing that was a straight up, I would come much later to discover was a lie, which is that the people who work for him agree to that, which is not true. I literally explicitly asked them, several of them, is that true? And they're like,
did you agree to be abused? No.
And then but see, we don't see it as abuse. It took a lawyer explaining to me and a therapist what is verbal assault.
Yes.
Distinct from verbal abuse. So assault, by the way, for those of you listening, you want to know. So assault is when somebody is threatening you. So I'm going to kill you, threatening you with harm in any way. It's constituted verbal assault. Verbal abuse, as I understand it, is where you are being put down, called names, which is we heard frequently in that environment, right? Just calling people awful, awful names. I mean, ones even with an explicit rating I will not repeat here. But it wouldn't be till much later why I thought that was okay all that time I was hearing it. I knew it wasn't okay for me. I'm like, I'm not going to work in that. Warner even
Yeah.
said to me one time, he's like, "Oh, man, you should work with me." And I said, "I will work with you, but I would never work for you." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I would never work in the environment that you
Yeah.
create as a workplace." And he laughed. He thought it was funny. And I was clear about that, but I believe the story that they had given consent. And I now understand from the lawyers, you actually can't give assent to
Yeah.
be abused or assaulted, physically, verbally, or otherwise. That's not a thing. And two, that it was all in the name of ruthless compassion, which are
I
two
remember
words
that.
I
Yep.
never, ever will condone together in the same sentence ever again, given what I
That
have.
is an oxymoron. It is
Oh
it
my
really,
gosh.
it is. And then, and this other idea that the end justifies the means.
Mm,
And that is counter to any spiritual truth that I know, because what I know is the end is the means. The way you walk there is what you get.
mm,
You can't ever justify. I think it's the refuge of charlatans who
mm.
say that. And I can't, and I think this has taught me that more than anything. Like, no,
Yeah.
whatever you want as the end, that is the path you have to walk. If you want human transformation, if you want a world that works for everyone, if you want heart-centered people who understand their own power, you have to walk that path with them. You can't denigrate them into it. It
Yeah.
doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I have so many questions for you about coaching.
Go ahead.
Bit more
What if my
through
story
your
you want
I
to
want because
know?
I want our listeners to have even more of a sense. So you left, you're a fairly young person, and then kind of what happened? Give us a sense
Well,
of.
and it was sort of funny because I've thought about it a lot. I mean, this has sort of brought me back into thinking about something I haven't thought about for many years. And I didn't leave like a slam the door. I can't take this. I'm leaving. Other things happened in my life that became a bigger priority.
Hmm.
And I didn't have the time. Like I got a real job. I got a job that required me to, work sometimes in the evening or work more in a way that was not compatible with the demands on the level of assisting that I was doing. I literally could not do both. I was working for a catering company. I was busy many weekends. I couldn't assist at forums. And it just sort of, I would say that it was more. And then the other thing that happened was I had met my first husband and I had bought into the line that was very big at the time. And this would have been about 1990, somewhere
Okay.
in there. I can't remember exactly. We'll say 1990 or so when I met him. And the line at the time was, you can be with anyone as long as you're committed to their commitments. You don't worry about how much you have in common. Now, this might have something to do with how I interpreted it, but remember, I was probably like 21 years
No,
old,
this is
22 years
sounding
old.
very familiar.
Sounds familiar to you.
Yeah.
You could be a deep sea diver and a mountain climber. I remember that being the
Mhm.
example. And as long as you're committed to each other's commitments, that's fine. I don't think that's actually the best recipe for a healthy marriage. I really don't. I actually think it's actually helpful to have some things in common and,
Yeah.
all of that. There may be an
Your
ingredient.
values that,
Right,
what I
exactly.
mean, Dave and I have been married now 26 years, will be 27 years this year. And we were definitely a landmark,
Yeah, he was a center manager,
relationship.
wasn't he?
Huh?
Yeah. He was
Yeah.
a center manager, yeah.
He was the center manager in the Seattle area center, which is where I participated first in 1996. So he, I joke, it's really since the pandemic, we super had to learn how to be in relationship because we were living together full time
Right,
for the first time ever.
right.
Because as a staff program leader for them, I was off traveling. So I was gone, most of
Yeah,
the healthy portion of the time. And then he had a job that had him away. So we were always kind of coming and going. And and there are certain aspects that I think that we learned, which is we did create a future in who we were for each other and inside of our participation, and we have kept that. We still actually have the same statement, and every once in a while we actually remember it.
again, it's why I love the name of this podcast is Confronting the Line, because even this idea of being committed to someone else's commitments, it's not a bad idea. It's just one ingredient. It's not the
Right.
whole meal. And I was really sold it at the time as the whole meal. So I sort of went in bright-eyed, bushy-tailed into this marriage that was not a good fit for me whatsoever. And so the other thing in my leaving was I got divorced. And the response that I got from folks that I knew in the Minneapolis Area Center, particularly one seminar leader, was not supportive of my decision, very critical of my decision. She had just gotten divorced herself, and she was really like, you better, worst decision I ever made to get divorced, and this is not right, and you should rethink this. And I was married to a man who was pretty verbally abusive, and it was not a good fit. He was not a good guy. And this being met by my community with criticism rather than understanding, that was kind of the nail in the coffin to me. And I think that interaction, as much as anything, made me say, yeah, I'm busy anyway. I'm just done. Like, I'm just out,
Well, that's a good, I can't resist now. So,
please.
you train coaches. So
Yes, I do.
we'll get back to the story, folks, I promise. But
Yeah.
Ann becomes a coach and a trainer of coaches and an
Yes.
educator of coaches in the personal and professional
Yeah.
coaching field,
Almost 25 years that I've been doing that. Yeah.
plus some neuroscience, like
Yeah.
the real kind. And not
Yes, it is the real kind. I'm
I've read,
very committed to rigor.
yes, and but that thing you just described, there's two key things in there that I want to pull out as red
Please.
flags for folks, which is one, if somebody's purporting any one idea as an answer or a solution, that's a flag.
Yeah.
Because there is in the living of life as a human being, there is no one answer. There's not even a answer that fits. It just doesn't fit. So when you say, okay, no, all you need is, there's already a red flag. But the other thing that you just described of being coached in that way, being coached, like told what to do in your personal life.
Right.
What I now understand in my own deconstruction, I've come to see how inappropriate that is. And in part also walking next to my daughter through her journey with complex trauma. And we've been through, so many different therapeutic models and things like that I've gone and worked with her in and learned a lot about. And I didn't, I was very lucky in Landmark because I went off to the wisdom area. And in the wisdom area, you're never supposed to give people an answer. You're only supposed to ask questions. So we came from a very different underpinning. So I was quite shocked this last year as I've been talking to so many people, and I would hear this again and again and again where they were
Told.
coached,
Yeah.
but it really sounded to me more like, wait, they were telling you should or shouldn't this? You should, like, it was actually hard for me to equate even in that environment because that wasn't the angle I came from. But just from a perspective of healthy coaching, what is that line in terms
That's
of?
not coaching. That was not coaching. I don't care what you call it. What she did was give me an opinion. That was not coaching. That's not what I train in it. There's some clarity around really what is coaching. And it's much more what you're talking about, that my job when I'm working as a professional coach, which I do, I have a private, I teach coaching and then I have some private clients. And my job is to help them find their answers, which is through a lot of reflection, questioning. Here's what I'm hearing. Am I hearing you right? And what about that? Tell me what the cost and benefit is, things like that. Because the idea is they need to come to what's true for them, not my opinion. My opinion does not matter. I need
Okay,
to
so
manage.
this is another really good line, because the other thing in groups like Landmark, and I keep saying that because there really are more than just Landmark.
Yeah, it's not just,
They're in
we
that-
have the
they're in that
Landmark.
mold. We have
Right.
that in common, but there's many of them. And then there's lots of people who have done programs like that and then gone out and set up their own coaching practices, their own whatnot, without really having the formal and good training. And there's not anyway, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
This thing. So a lot of times coaching in a group like that looked like laying a path with a destination in mind.
Yep.
So a lot of the coaching from the front of the room, even from forum leaders, I've seen this many times where, they already know the answer and they're asking questions to lead you to the answer. I read something somewhere sometime that actually had a name for that kind of, it's not actually inquiry, but it sometimes gets called inquiry, often gets called coaching, a discovery process. I'm going to have it so you could discover for yourself, but I have these incredibly well laid things, and your job, it's like you're the hamster whose job it is to grab the right niblet at the right time on the journey and end up in the right generation.
Yeah. And then you get, and if you say the right thing, and I'm thinking about in the large group, they're driving for something, they're driving for an answer, and you can feel that. And I remember that. And I remember being tired and hungry at the end of the day and just wishing the hell somebody would just say what the forum leader wants them to say so we can all go home.
And as the person in the hot seat, which folks, that's what that's called, by the way, whether you're in a seat or standing at a mic, but when you're in that spotlight, that's called hot seating. And when you're in the hot seat, you really are, when I slow down and I examine those experiences, you really do start, you're just trying to read the leader to find the right answer. It's the same thing we've discovered about torture, right? Torture doesn't work. Forget them.
It is somewhat
It just doesn't work.
Torture, because you're being held as separate from the group, which is very threatening to human beings. We need each other for survival. So anytime you stand out from the group and try to maybe stand up for a different opinion, it's very clear you're not going to win, that there are two options. Either you capitulate or you dramatically leave, which did happen on occasion, but not that often, or you just capitulate in that moment, because that's how you get the stress. That's how you reduce the stress. And that's what we're trying.
Well, I think there's another piece too, not just even capitulation. It's you figure out the right answer.
You figure out the right answer.
You figure out
what's
the answer.
It might
what's the thing I'm supposed to say.
Might not be your insight. But here's the thing, and just to go back to coaching for a minute, is one of the things when I'm working with new coaches, mostly what I do is I train advanced coaches. I train people who've already been through their basic training, but I do some work around the basic training. And really the very first thing that I have to work with people on is letting go of that they think they know, that as the coach, they have an answer. And leaning into curiosity and leaning into the idea that originally comes from Alfred Adler, that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. People are resourceful, and that they can find what they have within, and it is not your job to tell them. And so there's this process at the beginning of coach training generally where people have to kind of unlearn. It's the unlearning of having that answer and knowing the direction and having an agenda for what the person does. Now, if I'm working with you as a private client and you're paying me for coaching sessions, really my agenda is to help you with whatever you want. But if I'm your supervisor or running things in some other way, I may have a very different agenda, which is to get you to agree to something. And I might call that coaching, but it is not coaching as I know coaching, and as most of the really good professional coaches that I know would say, yeah, that is nothing compared to what we do. That's not what we do.
Do you think maybe, I know the evolution of personal coaching kind of comes a little bit out of the athletes, for example, have coaches. So if you want to be masterful, and this gets told a lot, right? You want to become masterful in a skill, then you want to have a coach who's a master. And in an athletic situation, it's like, yes, no, move your heel a quarter inch to the right.
Yeah.
Bring your hips in. It's instructional in that kind of domain.
Yeah.
I that's kind of what I think, like that got carried over, but now I'm working in people's emotional, spiritual, and mental health.
Yeah.
And that accurate? Like that's a different domain,
it's
right?
Sort of an unfortunate use of the word, coaching. And you're making me remember at one point I worked with an organization and we were bringing in a lot of coaching into this major, big multinational corporation. And they basically, as we're designing something with them, they were like, can we call it something else? Can we call it not coaching? Because in our culture, coaching means performance improvement, or you're on a performance improvement plan, or somehow coaching had a very negative association in their culture. And we were like, no, because this is a profession. We can't just, it's like you want to rename the accounting department. This is a profession and we're going to call it coaching because that's what it is. But it's a term that people can interpret and use in different ways. And athletic coaching is very different than development coaching, executive coaching, or personal development coaching, because it is not it is a pure coach is not going to go in and go move your foot to the right. in a personal
Right.
development kind of
Right.
process. And that's what keeps it from being manipulative. And that's, to me, the line. And the
Mhm.
really important thing that we want to watch in the field of coaching is that it doesn't cross over the line, because you're working with people who are being very, very vulnerable and are in this relationship that is, has tremendous potential, but also has potential for abuse. And
Mm.
unfortunately, I've heard too many stories of coaches who are not well qualified, who are not really coaching, but are calling it coaching, and they're really just bossing people around and
Right.
being manipulative and being destructive and being toxic. And
Oh
I
my gosh,
hate
I'm
that.
gonna totally tell one on myself. So as my daughter is coming into her early 20s, and I'm still deeply involved in, I call it the WWW, Wacky World of Werner. So that covers like
Right.
everything, it covers
Yeah.
landmark as whatever. But at this point, I'm probably just starting my stint hosting Warner and colleagues for the Being a Leader course and whatnot. But my daughter is having a lot of issues,
Yeah.
and clearly psychological issues. She's gotten diagnosed, I think, at this point with ADHD and depression and different things. It takes a while. She didn't get the complex trauma, which actually still, as I understand, is not in the DSM as an
I don't
official.
think it is yet. I don't think complex, but in the trauma world, everybody talks about it.
Everybody talk. Well, let me tell you, back then, this is like 10,
Mhm.
12 years ago, they did not, because
No.
I remember when she and I should probably her, because she's definitely the smarter of the two. She found the term and really made sense. But I remember telling her at one time, because she was like, I'm just mom and I'm trying to get her and be there for her and support her. And I just want to have her life work. I just want to have her life work. I want to have her be able to support herself, feel good about herself, take care of herself. And I remember telling her, no, what you need is a coach, not not a therapist.
Mhm.
And, or she was probably saying, I don't want a therapist. And I'm like, okay, well, how about a coach? And but I thought all the time to myself, like, what she needs is a coach. But what I was really meaning was somebody to hold you to account,
Yeah.
because
Which is,
that was the environment that
yeah.
I had just spent. I mean, that the environment, the program leader and staff environment of an organization, an LGAT organization, an organization like Landmark. Actually, let me be clear. LGAT is a form of training. The organization is Landmark. Some of their courses are LGATs, some are not.
Mhm.
But the culture in there is how you perform like that athlete, how you excel is through performance coaching, had a lot to do with being held to account.
Yeah.
And even if so your coaching job might be something like, well, what are your goals?
Yeah.
Okay, what are the milestones? All right, check in with me next week. It's your
Yeah.
accountability partner.
Yeah, it is. And I would say, and sometimes I call that, no shade, really no shade, but I sometimes call that the sitcom version of coaching. It's kind of like what are you going to do? How am I going to know? How am I going to know you did it? When are you going to do it? Whereas
I hear
the,
George Costanza's hacking right now.
yeah, kind of like that. Yeah. Um, and I think true, and this comes to the big question, I think, and I think it's the big question you're really leaning into is, what is human development? What does it take for people to grow and transform and move through things and heal and fulfill their potential? What does that take? And
Right.
what the research shows is that accountability does not get you very deep if you just do that. And part of the reason is that when you're focusing just on what the person is going to do, what's the action they're going to do, what's the goal, all of that. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. But one of them is that you are activating a particular network in their brain. We call it the task network, the task positive network. And it is all about, it's actually very useful. It's all about goals and present moment and what are you going to, that's all great. Has nothing to do with motivation though. It's not where you get your motivation. You get your motivation in a counter network called, and it's the opposite network. It's called the default mode network. And if you are in the task network, the default mode network is low. If you're in the default mode network, the task network is low. It's kind of like a teeter-totter. One sort of shuts the other one down. And in the default mode network is where we do introspection. It's where we, explore things like, why is this meaningful to me? Why do I care about this? What do I really want? It's, when you're asking questions about vision, you're doing that. But that is where the fuel for the change comes from. And
Mm.
what the research seems to point us to is that you need to really activate that in coaching, in human development, so that the person finds their motivation for the change, and that
Mm.
it's not just about the accountability. So that's
So
just
how would
one.
you map this onto, if you talk to somebody in the Landmark Network, they'd say, okay, Landmark, what makes it different is it's about being, it's ontology. And it cracks me up. I've studied enough about this to know how it's talked about. There's pretty young, let's just say kindergarten, it's like very basic level.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how would you map this onto being? Because what they say there is we're going to transform in your programs, you're going to transform who you are being about,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the circumstance or the situation. And I've heard this coach to people who were in actually dangerous and abusive relationships. I've heard this story similar to what you shared many times, which is they were coached to create a new context, to shift who they were being. And if they shift they have a transformation in who they're being, their partner is now going to be differently, so on. But it's interesting, as you were saying that came to mind, because I'm like, I wonder if they were pointing at that, that motivational
Yeah.
network, like without having any training or understanding. That's how most of these groups come to be. There's no training. It's instinctual. It's people
Right.
who, get enough
Which is
people.
also true about coaching. It wasn't created from a scientific base. I can map science onto it, but it was not created from there. I just have to say something just off the side, then I'll answer your question. But there's a whole school of coaching where the coaches call themselves ontological coaches, and they're very proud of it. And some of my good friends, but they're very proud of it. Well, I'm an ontological coach. And I always say, we're all ontological coaches. Like, it's nothing special. Like, you're not doing something different. Ontology is this, working with being, and we're all doing that. So,
We're all doing that all the time. Yeah.
calm down a little bit there, Mr. Ontological Coach, whatever.
Yes.
I say that with love.
I've heard that too. No, yes, it's all
Some good
said with
friends.
love. And yes, I've heard
So,
it.
yeah. So how would we map this on? I think, so there's the positive side of it, which is working with being, working with my belief system, working with how I see myself, working with my limiting beliefs and my old patterning and old messages that may come from family of origin that are not really useful for me anymore. How do we break those apart? How do we identify those and give people the capacity to notice and shift that? I think that is all very, very productive, really good stuff. Where it can break down is the over focus on accountability, I think. And part of the problem with that is that unless you do really good work around what's important to me, that they're not necessarily setting the right goals, or they're not setting goals that are, I call it, personally relevant to them. They're setting a goal that's coming from the outside. And so it's hard to stay super motivated if you're not finding that it has deep personal meaning, right?
Well, quite often, I mean, guys, when you get into this staff level of these groups, I'll just tell you what your motivation is. They don't give a shit. It is about, they don't. There might be some lip service from time to time, like what's the future you're living into, but that, and that's kind of takes the place of motivation. Like the goal is to create a future that's bigger, that's outside of hat over the wall kind of thing. And then figure it out to create mission impossible, as it were. And I mean, somebody told me a story about one of the executives who was in charge of the centers division. This was recently. I mean, this was in the like 2023, 2022. Wow. And they were looking at going from the centers model, the city model, to a regional model. And they wanted to merge this executive wanted to merge the US operations with the Canadian operations. And so, well, first they didn't want to do it at all because, well, I'll be clear. This is, am I going to say the name? No, I'm not. Some people will be able to figure it out, but I'm not going to. But anyway, so one of the executives, let's put it that way, very high up. And, and they were kind of like, well, first of all, if you don't have people to beat up for the result, you're not going to get one. And that, it's hearsay, I guess. Somebody was on a call where they heard that said. So that kind of thing. And that attitude is definitely very present in the actions. But here was this other thing that really caught my attention that goes with what you were just saying is They said, well, you can't actually, those are two different countries. So you can't have a region that includes Minneapolis and Ontario.
Right.
Because those are two countries, and the transaction systems that you
Right.
use and the rules and the
Laws are all different.
those are actually even two different entities inside the landmark entity pool, of which there are many. And this person was like, well, you just need to throw your hat over the wall and figure it out. I also had somebody in the Netherlands that tell me a story about being told, when she needed more people to help do the work, being told, well, get more volunteers. And they're like, well, that's not legal in our country. And they said, well, go change the laws.
Yeah. What's wrong with you?
That's the culture.
The limitation is your perception, and that's where it gets bastardized. And so there's this view that there is no reality, only what you're going to create. And anything's possible. And there's like that's kind of cool. Like, like what if anything were possible?
It's like this omnipotent power, right? Like if it's all about my perception, then I just change my perception, which they don't call it that. They call it the occurring in landmark, but that's what they're talking about.
Okay. The occurring.
Like how you're seeing it, which there's valid. Yes. Is this true? This is what we were taught. It's just so great to check all this out with a neuroscience and a coach, but I'm like, I have so many questions, Ann.
And we'll see if I have any answers at all.
Oh, it's great.
But let me say something about the relation, because I think this is also where it breaks down. Because you said gave this great example of, you change yourself and your relationship will change because you've changed the energy here and everything's co-created. And here's what's the real challenge. And I think you do such a good job with this, Anne, is that there's truth there. It's just not the total truth. And so what I know, because now I have an expertise in neuroscience and I developed an expertise in narcissism, cults, and psychopathy and all of that end of things. It's the truth of the matter is there are people who are not capable of change. It doesn't matter how off it you get. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how wonderful your communication capacity is, how all the tips and tricks you have. There are people who the research shows are incapable of change. And I'll throw a number at you. They looked at 37,000 people with high narcissistic traits over the course of a lifetime and found they do not change. So what you're looking at then is you're being told, just get off it, just shift, just create something different. And if you're dealing with someone who's a very toxic personality, a very disrupted personality, it doesn't matter. And you just put yourself in line for more abuse. And then you feel ashamed and guilty that you can't something's wrong here. I'm not off it. There's something off for me. I'm doing it wrong. I'm being wrong because I can't make them treat me well. I can't make this relationship work, whether it's personal or workplace, or whatever. No, the reason you can't make it work is that person is a bully who's never going to change. And nobody talks about
that was like, so in organizations like this too, that, anyway, there's some accounts. Actually, Eric Rojas has shared his account publicly.
Yeah. He's the one who got strangled.
Got strangled by a center manager. And but when he took that all the way up to the tippy top, because that's what you're supposed to do, you take it to the person who can do something about it. So you go to their manager and their manager and their manager. But when he got to the top, what he heard was, well, who are you being that he feels?
Who are you being? Who are you being? And the accurate answer to that, by the way, where personal responsibility, in my opinion, does fit in is, I was being someone who stayed for it and now I'm leaving, which is kind of what he did, right? Who am I being? I'm being a person who is tolerating being treated this way that no human being should be treated. I can be accountable for that. And the way that I will be accountable for that is bye-bye landmark.
Yeah.
This isn't safe.
Right.
And I think the other thing that happens is that not everybody and this maybe is obvious, so forgive me if it's obvious, but not everybody who acts in that abusive way is personally a disrupted, unredeemable person. They are acting as the energy of the system. And the energy of the system is shaped by the top of the system, which in this case is Werner Erhard. And so they're mapping onto that because that looks like the road to success. And you can have lovely humans. And I know probably have a number of examples of people that once they sort of like the scales fell from their eyes, they're kind of like, oh my God, I would never do that again. But in
Right.
that moment, that was the only way to survive in that system, and it felt right to them. And
Right.
that's part of the parsing out of this that I think we have to
Well, and
be
what's
aware
the thing about too, and because I think we're seeing a lot of this in our society right now, even I do something, even and I recognize that it's not right, but then afterwards, I've got to come up with a narrative to explain it or justify it. And
of.
that's where I see a lot of the problem. We're all going to do things that we regret. We're going
Yeah.
to all do things that we're going to later find out was a bad idea. That's nobody's escaping life without plenty of those.
Whatever screwing up,
And
right?
I have all the grace in the world for who people are and what they're doing before they knew better.
Yeah.
But once they know better and how they respond and how they deal with that moment of like, okay, yeah, I did that wrong, but oh, that wasn't right, but, and I mean, one of my guests, we had a big hoo-ha with that, you know.
I think I weighed in the chat on YouTube around
Yeah.
that because I didn't accept the but. I really didn't. I
And
didn't
look, this is a
accept it.
good person. This
Yeah,
is
I
a
get that.
good person. But like you said, in an environment for years, many, 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 many years, over 30 years of this, in an environment where that was an appropriate tool.
Yeah.
And that's the part that was shocking to me. I thought in my book, I'm like revealing that this physical was, and this is one of the things that a lot of people don't know, you know, and until people come out and say, because I didn't get into the details in my book, but one of the primary moves of Werner Erhard when he physically hurts people is to strangle them.
Which is interesting because if you think about this part of the body and this chakra, it's kill the voice,
Mm-hmm.
kill the identity, kill the ability to question or speak up
It's
about
also
something.
now been found to be it's strangulation, which, let's be clear, choking is when you choke on a hot dog, you know,
Oh,
something
okay.
lodged in your throat. Strangulation is when somebody or some external force is threatening your airway.
Right.
So they don't even have to squeeze. Just holding the hand there. I should probably stop doing that.
Yeah.
We should put a trigger
You
warning.
know, we're both just going with sort of natural.
Make
It's
a
the
note.
natural
Actually, we
way.
need to put a trigger warning because of this conversation on this episode. But that they've now found, somebody was sharing with me in Australia and Mexico, they've done significant studies, and it was in an effort to see if how they could make an impact on feminicide, which is where intimate partners kill
Yeah.
their intimate their partner. And what they found was, and is my understanding, that one of the consistent precursors to that was strangulation or threatening somebody's air. So those countries created much stronger laws and penalties if domestic abuse included the threatening of somebody's air or throat. And they did significantly drop incidences of partner murder, basically.
We're probably lagging behind in the United States on that, but that is interesting that it's kind of a predictor of more dangerous behavior, and they can see that. That makes a lot of sense. And I love what you're saying. It's like when you're in a system, it's very hard to see the system. The other thing that I think makes an impact, so I'll do another little neuroscience bit. When you're in that system, particularly when you're on staff, or very, very heavily assisting, and it's taking, many, many hours of your week. And that was true for me after I wasn't on staff. I was still spending probably 40 hours a week, there, which was eroding other things in my life that were important. But, that was the place where my reward was and where I felt like I could, achieve something. And so that's where I played. But the other thing that can really happen is a combination of things that increase the stress load in the brain. And some of it is just the being yelled at, the emotional abuse. The other is lack of sleep. Sleep gives us the chance one of the things that happens in sleep is that actually I think of it as the garbage collectors come, and I'm tapping here. If you're just listening, I'm tapping on the back of my neck because it comes from the spinal cord. You get cerebral spinal fluid, which flows through the brain, which kind of washes out everything you don't need. And so you kind of get that. That's when you have a good night's sleep and you feel like, I was sort of irritable yesterday, but I feel better today. And it's like, you had a good night's sleep. And that is something that is often compromised when you are working really hard as a high level assistant or on staff. You may not be getting enough sleep, and you're also getting stress and feeling that all the time. Well, the impact of stress on higher level thinking is it narrows things down to rubrics and black and white thinking, and it also
Mm.
kills empathy. So you need to be your brain, this part of your brain is the prefrontal cortex, and I'm tapping my forehead right now. It's considered to be sort of the executive director of the brain, and later to develop, it's one of the last parts of
That's
the
where
brain.
the little people in and out are at the drive.
Yeah, and that's not accurate. By the way, they say they had neuroscience scientists like consult on that, but all the more like the neuroscientists that I know are just like, that is not how we are, not how our emotions are operating. Like, what the hell?
I
Like,
haven't watched the
neither
second
of those
one.
movies
My
are
daughter
accurate.
loved the first one.
Well, they're fun movies. It's a fun idea. It's just not true, or it's 30% true, but not the total truth. So anyway, Inside Out. So we need this part of our brain, this prefrontal cortex, for high level thinking, for discernment, for making good choices. We need it for empathy and connection. And if you are overtired, if you're overstressed, what happens is you have too many neurotransmitters in this part of the brain. You're getting flooded.
Mm.
And so you can't make the neural connections that you need to make for real high level thinking. And
Does that
so you
include overstimulated?
yeah, it can. Absolutely. It absolutely can,
Because
depending I think for
yeah.
some people, yeah.
Well, I'm mapping a little bit of what you're saying onto Dr. John Hunter, who I don't know if you've got to meet him
Yeah, no,
directly.
I'm familiar with his work and he and I have talked, and I know he does this great thing with dopamine in terms of he's looked at that
That
relationship.
component. But part of just what had me think of it was he says, so a lot of people don't really understand the problem with LGAT because they kind of focus on the large group part. So large group awareness, which is kind of an unfortunate name. It doesn't really,
Right.
that it's in a large group, that's not really the problem. There's lots of group
Yeah, you
attending
can be in a
classes that are
corner.
very healthy, that are really great. It's not, the group isn't the key
Right.
function, although it's important to what is, which is usually you're told no notes. So you don't have a way to, like,
You don't have an anchor.
grasp something. In fact, I'm editing somebody's book right now, and they were talking at the beginning. They were talking about heartful learning, like open and
I
curious
love
and heartful. And they happened to say a line that we said a lot in Landmark, which is put aside. If you run in, as you're going through this book or as you're going through this class or this lesson, and you'll have things come up, put those aside. And I went back and I said, no, but say something like write them down,
yeah,
hold them for later. And then at the end, if those questions or thoughts or concerns or yeah buts or whatever were not answered, let's come back and address those, right? Don't, because one of the things that I've been taught is like being told to set aside, like you're telling me to set aside my internal alert systems, then
exactly.
overwhelming me with word salad is very convenient for that, but
Yep.
overwhelming, overstimulating, long hours, long sessions, tons of information, no way to offload it, like even writing it down or whatnot, but no way to, so your brain literally kind of shorts out basically.
Absolutely. You can't stay. I remember research that I read one time that said we listen for about 17 seconds before we start saying, what does this mean to me? And if
Mhm.
you can find a connection in what somebody else is saying, like I'm thinking about the interaction between a forum leader or whatever
Sure.
the leader and a person, they're doing that interaction. Um, and unless it feels really relevant to me, I'm probably going to check out. And that's just normal human. My mind is going to start to wander. Now, think about, Anne, if you're at all neurodivergent. So, for example, ADHD, and you are told you can't write anything down or doodle because often that is a strategy for somebody with ADHD. Even doodling is a strategy to stay present. It's not taking them away, it's helping them stay connected, and they're told they can't do that. And I think about, man, it's hard enough for a more neurotypical brain to stay, and they won't. Mind will just start wandering. That's what it does. It's designed
Right.
to do that. But if you've got an extra issue around that, that's going to mean that you're sitting in these rooms for hours and hours, and the things that maybe you might want to have sink in are not sinking in because you can't pay attention because of the
And it's
structure.
such an overload too. I mean, that's a key component of that's why I'm saying not all Landmark programs are large group awareness trainings. The core ones, the Landmark Forum, the advanced course, the ones that are squeezed, an intensive amount of information, an intense experience in a very short period of time, long
Yeah.
hours. They do, I find it very interesting. This is one of the many hypocrisies, is they do understand the dangers of not enough sleep. And there's a lot of protocols around participants in the forum, particularly in checking in. The course supervisor, the person in the back of the room supervising the room, is very accountable for being held to account for people are getting sleep. There's like all this stuff. It gets violated a lot, let's be clear. But they're very,
And that's
very, very
different, by the
aware.
way. That's so different than when I did it in 1982.
Oh, yeah.
It's like we were there till 3 a.m. if that's what it took, like.
And they got sued a bunch.
Yeah.
So they had a bunch of bad outcomes. I mean,
Psychosis. You can get psychosis from not getting enough sleep. And you also leave whatever time of the morning, 1 a.m, whatever, and you're hyped up and you've got adrenaline pumping through your system. It can be very hard to get to sleep. Then you're supposed to be back at 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning, and you didn't get the sleep you needed to integrate what you're learning even.
Then when you get on staff or you're on one of those teams, I heard this frequently, you can sleep when they throw dirt in your face.
Mm-hmm.
So you're literally coached not to sleep. Like that's, no, a highly productive person, doesn't need a lot of sleep. And it was like a badge of honor. And that's one of the things, that's why I say you have a ring too now. I love my ring.
Yeah, I love my ring. Yes.
How much REM sleep? How much deep sleep did I get? What's my score? I'm running about 90 right now. I can't believe how great.
How did you get to 90? I'm at 80. And I'm considering that pretty good.
Bioidentical hormones. I have a whole, anyway. And
got
CBN, somebody introduced me to CBN. My deep sleep is almost doubled.
Well, that's amazing. What are you doing?
Well, I have a whole combination of things. So one, I do bioidentical hormone replacement. I have a doctor that I work with that I do that. Also healthy eating, nutrition, good habits. It's a holistic thing. And then also I found these great CBD.
Yeah, I do that. That helps. I find that helps a lot. That helps a lot. So there you are in this place where your brain is not at its best because it may not be rested enough to be at its best. And you're stressed because you don't know when you're going to get yelled at again. And your goal is a goal that benefits the organization. And you're trying to turn yourself into pretzels to try to figure out how this is your commitment. But the truth of the matter is it's all about how many enrollments, ultimately, how many people, how much money can we bring into the organization? And then, trying to find my way into that. I have to say, I had a funny thought. One of the things that actually got healed out of reading your book and doing this exploration was, this is just a little bit of an aside. I don't know where it will take us, but I was terrible at enrollment. I was so bad at it. I was terrified of it. And so I went on the logistics supervisor path. That was the path that I went, I did the introduction to the forum leaders program, terrified the whole time. And I don't know, like in my whole time, in 10 years of involvement, I maybe enrolled 3 people. I just couldn't do it.
That is really bad.
It was really bad. You did not want me in your enrollment room.
Answering the phones.
I was just and don't get me on the phone because I'm going to be calling the woman who tells you what time it is, for 3 hours.
Right. Call your answering machine. Yeah.
I was just so bad. I was really scared. Now you have to remember contextually, I was probably 19 years old, right? I was young, 19, 20, 21 in there. I wasn't, I did not know how to deal with rejection and criticism and all of that. And so, but what got healed for me, I think it was a combination of your book and also Sarah Edmondson of A Little Bit Culty, who was saying how bad she felt about being really good at enrollment and getting all these people involved. And I thought to myself, well, there's a perspective shift. I didn't manipulate anybody.
You don't have penance to do for all those people that you got enrolled. Yes, that's hilarious.
I was so bad at it. I was so terrified. I was so scared of actually talking to someone about it.
Oh my gosh, well, you have to know. So Tony, my producer partner who's listening on in here, and but he told me the other day that he registered 200 people.
Well, Tony, you got penance to do that I don't have to do.
That's right.
Been carrying, I have to say it's sort of a joke and a little bit, but that was the currency of the organization, and to feel, so there was this feeling of constantly being a failure, that I wasn't, transformation equals sharing transformation. I wasn't doing it. I wasn't enrolling people. I wasn't bringing enough guests. And that lived with me for many years,
I've
up in,
talked to so many former staff, some 25 years, 30 years out, and they're still living like they were a failure because
yeah.
they did not enroll and register enough people. And or my favorite is if you were on staff, anybody who's on staff in Landmark, if you're out there, you are hereby absolved from lying, because everybody on staff lies to survive, because you have to at a certain point. But really suffering, they thought it was just them rather than it was the system.
It
It
was
was
the
the
system. It was
system
right.
that you're in was shaping you, which,
And it was this like crazy, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if some of what's coming to mind. I'm thinking about when I worked in New York and I was a project assistant. I was just the lowliest staff member possible on there. But even so, every so often it was everybody on the phones. And finally, my manager in my area basically said, we were working on a project that had a deadline. It actually was Werner speaking at Madison Square Garden and the Felt Forum, and I was the project assistant working on that. And finally, I think my manager took pity on me and basically said, she had two assistants, said, we're on a deadline. I can't give you to them for enrollments. And I got out of it. I was so grateful
nice.
not having to be on the phone. But there were things I remember when I still was being asked to be on the phone. It would be 10 o'clock in New York. It would be too late to call anyone. So you know what we were supposed to do?
Call the
Call numbers
Pacific
in
Coast.
California.
I know exactly the thing. Yeah, it's being unstoppable is a badge of honor in those groups. And it doesn't matter who you run over, who you hurt, like they don't want anything too obvious, because that could be, bad
It's
press.
like, and I know people have told this, and this happened to me and I didn't follow through with it, but it was like, call your grandma. My grandma is not going to do the S training or the forum. She's just not, but
That's when
you're
you call your
playing,
answering machine.
that's exactly, but that was, you're playing small. You're ripping her off of a chance to be transformed. It's like, you don't know, my grandma's not going to do this. Let me just tell you.
Well, that there, I think, particularly for any of our listeners that haven't been deep in these kind of environments, and we're talking specifically about the Landmark one here, but that the enrollment thing, the narrative is how you get talked into doing that, why you're doing that all the time, is because you are transforming the planet. So Scientologists are clearing the planet.
Yeah,
Landmarkians are
and
transforming the planet one person at a time.
right.
And there really is, you really do believe to your little toes that if every single person, I had somebody in my kind of recovery group say this recently. She goes, I still think that if every person did the Landmark Forum, that we would be in a much healthier planet. And I said, okay, well then how do you deal with the fact that over 3 million have, and we're in the situation that we are?
Yeah. It's a lot. It's
And
a
how
big,
do you deal with, that's one of the other things that just takes time. 26 years later, I'm looking around and, I was in a deeply social part of Landmark. Wisdom had a big social component. So, people for years and years. And I love the wisdom grad. I actually love the grad. And, but I kind of started to notice that people are dealing with the same stuff they were dealing with 20 years ago in my wisdom course.
which tells you something. And that reminds me of something that John Hunter said. You're probably more up to speed on than I'm, but there's really no research that says there's long-term transformation, that it's short-term. Right. It's that high that you get because of the situation that you're in, but it's not the long-term.
Let me run my theory by you about that, because me and Ed Gerwitz are having all kinds of arguments. Oh, we should have him on. We can have a whole great debate about is transformation real? And because for him, transformation is his life's work, and he's a good guy, and I really come to love him a lot. And but he and I are having this ongoing debate. What is transformation really, and is transformation real? And the more I ask the question, the less I think it is. And okay, now in my little run up, I forgot the thing. God, what did you just say?
You said you want to run something by me. What is transformation? All of these people that have.
Okay, here's what it is. This is what I think is happening in the brain. And I have no training to say this. So I want to ask somebody who does, which is what does happen in programs like that is I do have a shift in my perception. I have a shift in how I view it, right? So to use my own example, I was a teen mom, and that had all this stuff that it meant. I was never going to this, and I was never going to that, and this and that was, all this kind of stuff. was going to have 10 kids by the time I was 25. I was going to be in welfare for most of my life, blah, 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 whatever. I had this whole future like laid out for me.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of a rebellious sort, as most of you probably noticed by now. So I was like, that's not happening to me. And I set out to prove the world wrong and all that. And, and then I did like, oh my gosh, I sewed my son's clothes. I made him organic food before that was a thing. Trust me, you should have seen what I had to make baby food with. But I was going to prove to the world not only that I could be a good mother, but I was going to defy all that.
Yeah, you're going to be the star mom. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, and then I'm, fast forward, at 21, I met my first husband just before my 21st birthday. And anyway, fast forward 5 or 6 years, and turns out my first husband, good man. Also, now I understand probably had very serious unresolved trauma. I'm like, I do know enough about his childhood to know that he was in a pretty abusive step parent situation. But what I ended up with was a drug addict and a philanderer and somebody who was abusing my son, his stepson.
Ouch, 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 ouch.
Yeah, not good. So by the time all of that is like coming to head, and that's what has me do the Landmark Forum. And kind of what I had to deal with is my rebelliousness called, I'm not going to do all those predictions, also had me looking past a lot of red flags in my relationship because I was living my proving story right. I'd found a good guy. He loved me and my kids, da, da, da. Like I was so committed to that story rather than what was actually happening.
Yeah,
literally wasn't seeing what was happening. That's how it works. And then I do the forum and a couple things happened. One, I knew immediately, like by the Monday between the Sunday night and Tuesday, that what spurred me to register was he said he was going to leave me. And that was a huge crisis. And I'm like, oh no. But anyway, by Monday, Tuesday night, I'm like, oh yeah, you should move out. Like,
wow.
That's good. Because what I had been suppressing and unwilling to see, I could see it. Yes. Because I was able to lay down, this is my assessment after, but I sort of laid down all that defensiveness. I laid down all that righteousness, but I also laid down the story. Now this is probably more happens in the advanced course, which I happen to do a month after my Landmark Forum. Like I'm like, boom, boom, boom.
Right.
But I lay down my story that I was trapped in a particular kind of existence because I had a child as a teenager.
Yeah. So
and
you got choice. You found yourself in choice is what I
yeah, exactly. And so that really opened up things and it changed my perception of myself. And so I started to say yes to things that maybe I wouldn't have had the opportunity for, said yes to. And that led to a lot of things, including ultimately becoming a landmark leader. Yeah. I set up my own business. It's actually pretty successful. And then I actually closed that business to become a landmark staff member. And I led a
different possibility for your life, which is really,
exactly.
And this is again why it's, it's not black and white. It's not all bad.
In my view, what I'm seeing now but now what I can see 20 some years later, I can also see, so I have a daughter who has complex trauma that is directly correlate to all the time that I wasn't there. So the things that happened to her in her childhood that led to her trauma happened because in part, some sexual assault that happened to her when she was young while I was away. And then also she spent every weekend with her dad, who I kind of foolishly thought, well, he was terrible for me, but he was a good daddy. That's wrong. Yeah. Anyway, he was a good daddy, kind of.
But he wasn't dealt with his own stuff, which means
he dealt with his own stuff. Exactly.
Whoever he's around, you can't separate that. It's going to come out for sure.
So, but for me, I'm like living a miracle. Like she's going to her dad's every weekend, which makes it possible for me to fly off and lead programs. And I'm living, all this kind of stuff. But it came at a very, very high cost, primarily to my daughter, to my son, even a little bit. But now I can see, honestly, I say this all the time, the damage for me, and I think for many graduates who get deeply involved in work like this, wasn't what happened while I was there, with obvious exception being people who experience psychotic breaks and abuse and all that, which happened, but is all the things that wasn't getting tended to because I was there instead.
I agree totally. Yeah. You started out by saying you had a theory about what might be
So my
happening.
theory about
Yeah.
transformation is what it really is a perceptual shift. So I have a shift in my perception or how I see something, which creates, to use landmark language, new openings for action, new opportunities for being. It's now said in layperson terms. That just means I like exactly like I described, like I maybe say yes to things that I would not have said yes to when I
Maybe
had that.
have more confidence about your ability to do something or will
Right.
or more courage like that.
So to
So,
me, like where I'm at is like, is transformation really just I shift in perception? And the dark side, the dangerous side is my shift in perception does not change the circumstances. Because here I am, I'm 56 years old. I have had to drop out of school in high school. I don't have any college. I don't have any college education. I have a GED, right? I don't have any college education. I don't have anything. The actual circumstances of my life from 30 years ago are
yeah.
and there's real repercussions. I looked at going back to school to, get a degree, whatnot. I would be 62. And I was like, wow, look at that. And I just think that's the misnomer. That's the part that happens. Yes, I can shift my perception, which does open up maybe opportunities and actions. And then I might go in journeys and explorations I would not have otherwise gone in. Is that really transformation or is that just
Well,
life?
so I love this. I love this because I think this is something we wanted to talk about that you and I've talked about before.
That's why I said
Because
you're going to come on many times. We have so much.
so, so I actually have a way that I look at, we could call it growth, we could call it transformation, all of that. And in this process, in your book, and then me sort of going back into thinking about large group awareness trainings that I really hadn't thought about for many years, but came back up to be healed. Thank you. I started thinking about what's actually happening and what needs to happen and what have I seen happen in other work that I've done. And so what I came up with is that there are four aspects that taken together may actually lead us to transformation, and that large group awareness trainings largely are just good at the first one. So
Mm.
here's my four
Oh,
aspects
yes, this is
that,
exactly what we want to get to.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think this is what you wanted me to talk about. So the first one, I call it realization or awareness. And it's that, oh my God, I'm the common denominator. Oh, wow. Like that's
Or the S training was literally, folks, if you want to know where you got the term "I got it," you got it from the S training because that's what made it popular.
absolutely. And I think about the realizations that I got in the S training that were really, really helpful. Like this feeling, one of the things that was really, really hot for me when I did the S training at age 18 is that I have alopecia and I had lost my hair when I
Mm.
was 17. And so I wore a wig. I felt I still do, by the way. I never grew back. So I just have better wigs. But anyway, so I had lost my hair and I felt very disconnected from the human race.
Mm.
Very. And that was why my friends really wanted me to do the S training. So I came in, I did it. And the biggest aha I had, which was transformed, it really transformed, maybe we won't use that word, but it really impacted my life. Similar, I think, to what you're saying is I still belong. This is just a thing. Everybody's got something.
Sweet.
Everybody's got a reason they don't feel as good as everybody else. This is just the human condition. And I learned that at age 18. And that was a big realization that was really important. And I think often this kind of thing is very good for that. But if it doesn't continue on with the other aspects, it just lives as an aha. And
Mm.
so for me, the next aspect is regulation, which means I can regulate my unpleasant emotions, my tendency to want to yell at someone, my own frustration. I can regulate that and I can choose productive responses rather than just more automatic responses. I'm aware of what's going on and I don't think that is stressed in the way that it should be. And in fact, a lot of the time it was sort of like, this ruthless compassion idea was kind of permission to be dysregulated, you know?
When you were always chasing, Tony refers to it as chasing the dragon, right? Like literally taking term from heroin addiction, but because it's like that, because you're
Yeah.
chasing those ahas, you're chasing the next insight, the next breakthrough, the next, because I think you nailed it there. You do stay in that first stage and it feels good. And this is where Dr. John's work, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Kind
He
of
talks
that.
about the dopamine. I mean, he's talking about it in terms of dopamine and that high that, you feel in a bipolar, and so that hypomania. And
And
it's
it's a part of the process. It's just not enough. So then we have to be truly, what is transformation? To if we just take that word out of it and just say, to walk in the world as a consistently heart-centered person, to me, is part of how I think of transformation.
mm,
So then then the next thing I need, or, these are not totally linear. It's not just the realization. It's not just the ability to regulate and I'm doing up and down, by the way, if you can't see me, but I'm thinking about, I'm regulating the sensations from my body, the thoughts in my brain, and I'm able to make productive decisions about how I do that. Maybe restrain myself from yelling like that, have a more productive conversation that
this is
helps.
also why somebody told me that this in the LifeSpring training they did, which those are, all over the map. They were told at the end of the seminars, at the end of the LGAT training, the, similar format, to not make any major decisions for 2 weeks,
Yeah,
which
makes sense.
happens to coincide with the 7 to 10 day in the limited studies that have been done.
Of
Yeah,
the
to
high
have
of the
the
realization.
realization high, regulate, and from there, which leads, I think, perfectly to your next stage. I think of these as like a nested series of holes.
Yeah,
Like,
they're kind of overlapping, I'm not exactly sure, but they're not necessarily linear. But another key component of this kind of growth is then, to me, and this is probably the biggest one, is integration.
mm,
And and integration is, for me, it's a very, very big word. I started out studying neuroscience because I actually wanted to understand human consciousness. And then what I discovered as I was studying neuroscience is there were a lot of correlates to coaching. And so I've become an expert in coaching, in the coaching world. But my true love is transformation and human consciousness. That's my big
mm,
project of my life. And when I went to study neuroscience at the graduate level, what I was looking for is there a core concept that is critical for human development? And the core concept that I've found, and I've been working with this for 10 years and I haven't found a better one, is integration.
mm.
And integration is taking two differentiated elements and linking them. So you get out of polarity thinking. I think you taught a lot of this in the wisdom course, probably, because it's really beautifully core. You are able to hold both things in
Yeah.
a linked way where you're not choosing one or the other. So, like, from a neuroscience perspective, what does that look like? That looks like I know what my right hemisphere is good at, I know what my left hemisphere is good at, and I can use both of them concurrently. That's just one example. It's not just right and left.
I think when you talked earlier about the motivation and the tasks,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So those, because ultimately my motivation and tasks get linked.
Yeah.
Right. And we have lots of techniques, having your vision board present, having your purpose statement outlaid. There's a lot of advice that's given to do, but that's what it's doing, is it's integrating that motivation with.
Integrating them. You're not making one more important than the other. And in order to integrate, you have to differentiate. You have to be very clear on, what your vision is, right? For example, or one of my best examples of this is, I had a client she became my poster child for leadership. And she came to me and she wasn't. And she gave me permission to share this story. And one of the things she came to me for coaching is she got feedback that she was too much of a mother hen.
Mm.
It's just a dear. And she told me, she came into coaching, she said, Ann, I want you to toughen me up. And I just laughed. I'm a rebel
I
like
love that
you.
she came to you for that. That's like,
I know, I love that. Like,
that's how
really?
that's how I swear.
So I said, I'm not going to do that. That's your secret sauce. Your team would follow you through fire, and they would. And I knew her team, and I worked with her team too later. I said, but what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what we need to add.
Mm.
What is not differentiated yet? Where can you bring that, more incisive piece? And part of how it was showing up is she was unwilling to fire people who were not good fits for her team. And as a leader, sometimes you have to be willing to fire people. And it was so
Right.
hard for her, because she'd be like, but he just had a baby, just like,
Right. Yes.
like that. So we worked together. We worked on this integration, that you don't have to become a jerk but
Right.
you can include this. And what I will tell you is by the end of the time we worked together for about 12 years in coaching. And by the end of the time that we worked together, she was considered by her international companies. Is a big company. Everybody would know the name if I shared it. She was considered to be their poster child for leadership because she was
Wow.
seen as someone who was masterful at relationship and masterful at task because we worked to help her integrate those.
You also just subtly said something that I think is really important. It also gets skipped a lot, which is you worked with her for 12 years, which has a
Yes.
couple of cool factors in it. One, over time, and it did come to an end. So both of those things are important. So when you get involved in groups like this, there's never an end. There's always another course, another lesson. Spiritual groups, we know that there's always another level, there's another layer, there's so on.
And like in Scientology, they would just keep moving the goalposts, like the minute.
That's what every group I've heard from or worked with or myself was that's where Yoga Man got in trouble big time. He moved the
Yeah,
goalposts because he needed to get his loyal following to pay for another product so he could pay for
exactly.
his next thing. Okay, so we've got realization, regulation,
Regulation. So I'm stable.
integration.
And then the
Okay.
last one is stabilization, and it's a little different than regulation. Stabilization to me is being able to have that insight be incorporated into your being and really last. So it's kind of like and I think of this in terms of like psychedelics and things like
Okay.
that a lot of times what's happening there, or what Dr. Hunter talks about as sort of that dopamine rush of the insight, that what's happening is you're being shown a new possibility. And I think this happens a lot with
Mhm.
psychedelics and medicine, plant
Right.
medicines and
Not
things like that.
medicine.
You get shown, Aldous Huxley called it, we open the doors of perception. So we get shown this possibility, but it's not stable in us. It's just sort of an
Right.
idea. And in order to stabilize, we have to practice. We have to practice again and again and work on it and reflect and do action and reflection and really work with it until someday you sort of go, oh my gosh, I don't even really have those thoughts anymore. And I'll give you an example of this.
Mm.
So, one of the things that I'm aware of in my own is that when I get tweaked about something, one of my team members doesn't do something the way I think they should, for example. I, like many humans, can take a little super slide down to rigidity and just be really, critical.
I like that super slide.
Super slide right down to rigidity. And I've been really working with integrating that and balancing that rigidity with a more open view that has more empathy
Mm.
in it. Practicing when I go to rigidity, activating empathy, because they're kind of opposite. And I was talking about the two networks and they actually sort of relate to that. Where stabilization comes in is I had something that happened probably like last year, fairly recently. I've been working with this for a long time, like 10
Mm.
years, and gotten better about it, more conscious of it. But this thing happened where I got irritated and I immediately had a positive intrusive thought without trying, which was, oh, I wonder how they might see this, like automatic. I
Mhm.
didn't have to effort for it. And I thought, okay, my desire to not just land in rigidity has become more stabilized because it's happening automatically.
Oh,
And
beautiful.
that's what I think of as stabilization. So instead of saying something critical, I don't even have that desire because an opposing view has just come right in automatically. And
So
I was like,
again, you're kind of pointing to one of the things on the line. So yeah, I can see why you would say that is a formula for transformation. So I think fundamentally, when most people say transformation, what they mean is a permanent change,
yeah,
a permanent
a
change in
stable.
state.
They're stabilized at another level of the mountain. They're at a
Right.
different place in terms of they're at a different level of consciousness up from where they were, and they're
And I think
stable there.
what's important here is that doesn't happen in 3 days and an evening.
No, it
Doesn't
can't.
happen it doesn't even happen in a 10-session seminar series or
No,
even a year-long wisdom course. It happens over
time.
time. And yes, lots of tools are required. And one of my big things with a lot of these groups too, the analogy I use a lot is imagine you're trying to we're building a house now. We're building our dream house up in the Pacific Northwest. And my husband's up there. The foundation starts getting poured next week. Woohoo!
Yeah.
And but imagine if I was trying to build that house with like a hammer and a screwdriver and a crowbar, and that's it.
Yeah.
It would take me a really, really long time to build the house, and we need lots of tools, and we also need lots of rest,
Yeah.
because that is where your brain is doing the work. It's where a
Exactly.
lot of that integrative work is happening, right? In that deep sleep we were talking about earlier. And that's where these groups, but that's not a money-making proposition
No.
exactly. Although, honest to God, I swear to God, it could be. I'm telling you, if Mick, if you're listening, I know how you guys could turn this around. I swear to God. And one of the things is stop claiming that you're creating transforming lives. Just stop it. Stop it. That's not what's really happening. But there are powerful things that are
Well,
happening. I'm
yeah.
having realizations and openings and whatnot. I think the forum should be like it would be a thing. Oh, you do this program, you're dealing with something. There's only certain kinds of things that are appropriate to deal with. And that there's other things like what my daughter's dealing with trauma. The forum is
Therapy.
not the place for that. She needs to be with a trauma informed therapist, as well as other modalities,
Yep.
somatic work and different things.
Oh,
And it's a holistic thing. But if you actually just knew, like, oh, okay, gosh, I'm kind of wrestling with a big decision in my life right now, da da da, that kind of thing. Okay, do the forum.
and I need some real insight around it. I need an aha. I need a new
Yeah,
way of new possibility. But then it's the hard work of the repetition. And this is part of what I love in coaching, is that it is usually in my engagements with my clients, it's a long-term engagement. And that's not just about me keeping them, certainly I hope my clients would agree, it's not about me keeping them dependent. It's about that we're in a process that is so helped by having somebody to reflect with
right.
and process with, and maybe ask the questions I'm not asking myself, and maybe bring a tool in that I wasn't aware of. And that over time, in that process of reflection and all of that, we integrate this into a way of being in the world.
Mm.
And but that takes, yeah, it's,
It takes time. It takes multiple tools. It takes time in, time out. I mean, Brian, who was the source of he was the wisdom area, but he used to tell us all, he used to get on us. He's like, stop hanging on to people. People are not supposed to stay here. They're not supposed to stay. Part of why I think I saw a lot of what I saw was because I had been off in, I call it happy camp. I've been off in, and the ground of the fundamental sort of distinction, the wisdom area that we came from at that time was all is well, which really all is well, and let's get curious.
yeah,
So
beautiful.
and I've continued that with my work with the Ridwan School and the Diamond Approach. I've deepened that in a lot of ways, that approach to life. But yeah, let's get curious. Let's spend time like that. And if they actually were just honest about that, I actually think they'd be okay.
I
It'd be
think
a
they
better
would.
business model. And this is
And
true not just for Landmark, but so many of these groups.
many, that there's a place. And one of the things, if I go to the positive, and this is really, something that I share with my clients, there are things that really happen best in one-to-one work. They really do, because of the
Mm.
safety of the container, because of the feeling held by one person in good one-to-one work, like good coaching, good therapy. There are things that can only happen there. There are other things that can only happen in groups. So, for example, I can tell, I can have a client who's firmly convinced that they're the only one in the world who's ever had this problem or ever felt this way. And, it doesn't matter what I say as a coach or what I ask them. If I can have them, this just actually happened. I was consulting. This wasn't my client, it was one of my students' clients who was really, really struggling coming out of a narcissistic abuse relationship and really being so really super victimy, and which I don't shame her for anything. But my student was having trouble getting traction. And I said, the best thing you can do is send her to a support group. She needs to see she's not alone. And she also needs to see that she can be a resource for others. And that doesn't happen in one-on-one. You need a group for that. And so I think there's a beautiful potential connection of the marriage of good one-on-one work with good group work,
Yeah.
because they do different things for us as humans.
And using different modalities at different times.
Mhm.
I mean, even this is one thing I've learned in walking with my daughter. At different times in her journey, she's needed different kinds of
Different
things.
things.
Like sometimes what she needs is massages. She
Yeah.
needs to work the body,
Yeah.
but she gets basically trauma informed massages, body work.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like she was telling me earlier today, she goes, Mom, I'm at that phase where I just need to break stuff. They have these places now. Have you heard about this?
You know
Where you
what
can
I
go and break stuff.
You know what I heard about that? I don't know if this is true. I haven't validated this, but what I heard is that dominantly in those break it rooms, it's like 90% women who sign up to go do that.
That's so great. Well, that's one of the things. I have so much stuff I could,
I
we're
love
going to
that.
talk a lot because that's actually one of my subjects I have on a list is the value of anger. And
Yeah.
I also have the value of victim, of actually being free to say, you know what?
Yeah.
I was victimized.
I was
I was victimized.
victimized.
I think
I don't
women
have to.
have been suppressed a lot and gaslit out of their, out of
Yes.
their impacts of having experienced where they say now 1 in 3, I mean, it's estimated that 1 in 3 women have experienced sexual assault. I can tell you
And
from the
if
women's
you
group that I run, it's higher than that. I'm
It's
telling you.
higher than that, especially if you include emotional abuse and all the other ways that all the
Right.
other types of abuse. It's higher than one in
But
three.
we've turned being a victim into a dirty,
Oh,
yucky thing.
absolutely.
So you can't
Absolutely.
ever say victimization, like to say that I was victimized. Yes, you are going to be confessing to having been a victim. And I think that is what keeps so many people stuck. And look at what's going on in our society right now. People don't want to say like, oh man, I may have gotten that wrong. Right. Or because they would then have to deal with it. They were manipulated or that they believed
Right.
some misinformation or they believed in a leader who probably was very deliberately with expert prowess leading them down a rosy path. But we don't want to be a victim. I'm not going to be a victim of that person. So, but instead, I'm going to come up with these crazy narratives and try to move past it. That's my other thing I'm on a war against. I'm just moving on. I'm like, well, you might as well say I'm moving on to the next one. So,
Right. Well, and for me, when I think about it, I work with a model of my business partner and I, we work with a model of consciousness and we've been working to map neuroscience onto this model of consciousness which is looking at consciousness in terms of levels, not just a thing that is or isn't, but what level. And it comes from the people who have done research in this area. But one of the things that really changed for me over the years, when we first created the model, which is about 15, 18 years ago, somewhere in there, I really had it as, it was you were either above the line or below the line. And as we started understanding it better and working with it and having it reveal itself to us, what we really saw is no, it's not an either or, it's an and. And
mm,
in order to be in, and I hate to even use the word because it sounds so hierarchical, but in order to be in higher levels of consciousness, you have to include everything. It's not
mm,
about, no bad vibes, it's all good, don't bring, no
otherwise
negativity.
known as toxic positivity now.
Yeah,
I love that
exactly.
term. When I learned that, I was like, oh my God, that's so great. Yeah, because we've been in the diamond work for the last like 3 years now. We've been studying like
Yeah.
the heart element. And what I've learned the more I've gotten into that is when I feel my heart breaking, that's my heart being whole. That's
Oh,
one of its capacities. That's one of
yeah.
its things. Like I
Yeah.
know I've been living in this question really since the pandemic. How do I live in the world as it is open hearted? And that is more challenging than ever right now.
Because your heart's gonna break.
Yeah.
And the ability, when I know that I'm with someone who's really working their path, whatever their, I don't want to quantify as a level, but they're really in the game, working their path. They don't have a problem telling me about their anger or their sadness or their hopelessness. They can
Mhm.
be present to it. They can include it because it's information, it's part of us. My
Right.
hopelessness, and there have been days in the last month or so where I see something in the news and all I can do is cry. And
I
in that
know.
moment,
I had one of those days yesterday.
yeah, I'm
I keep
just
bursting into
aware.
tears. And I was like, wait. And then I realized, oh, you just need to have a good cry.
Yeah.
Like just, it's okay.
Right now I feel hopeless, or right now I feel afraid, or right now I'm angry. And that's a part of me and it's a legitimate part of me. So I use this metaphor. My partner and I just did a video on this because the metaphor that I like about this is I say, these are parts of me. And this sort of ties to like internal family systems
Okay.
and
Internal family systems.
right. These are parts of me. They're legitimate parts of me. But if we're all on a bus together, they don't have driver's licenses. They get to be on the bus because
Yeah.
sometimes they see things that I'm not seeing, and they might tell me, hey, be aware, that's, you're about to hit a truck
Right.
kind of thing. But if I let them drive, they're probably going to drive me over a cliff. If I let anger drive, or if I let sadness drive, but they get to be there, they get to inform me. But I want to have other aspects of me, like and innovation and things like that. I want to have them at the wheel, listening to what the other sort of passengers on the bus say. And that's my only distinction, is you don't get
That's
to.
another thing that's happened big time in the productivity craze, is that somehow, and this very much fits with the kind of patriarchal, weirdo masculine, not true masculine, but the kind of weirdo perception of masculinity that we've been living with, is that somehow emotions are what we have to put aside and landmark the term as bracketed, or they don't even call them emotions. They call it what's going on with you internally. And I was talking with somebody the other day, and I said, you know what? She called me because she wanted to figure out how to get over this emotional response she was having before she got onto an important call to make a result happen. And I said, well, maybe you should take it with you. I said, maybe that should go with you. I said, your emotional system, I said, we got to drop this thing that we've been trained in, that somehow that's what we've got to put aside. No. Your emotional, that is an alert system. When the tornado sirens go off, I pay attention. Right. Your internal tornado sirens are going off.
Absolutely. It's, and I think about, there's a term from law, which is, might not be pronouncing it right, but I think it's cui bono.
Yes.
Who benefits from the idea that everything is absolutely personal responsibility in a system like Landmark? Who benefits from that, really? Or is that just a way of controlling people?
Because if I'm always responsible, they don't have to be.
They don't have to ever.
Those that want the translation on that. Like that's, it is a heavy, heavily used in exploitive and abusive situations. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's really, if you start asking, well, who benefits from this? Is it really a benefit to me? Or is it really a way that the organization just evades any responsibility because I can't question anything?
If we started actually looking even at the news and different things that are happening, but asking it authentically, with authentic and real curiosity, but wait a minute, who's really benefiting here? If we end that program, who benefits and who loses? And then, but asking for real, with a real open mind, whatever side you're on. And then you're going to start to see your way through that in a different way.
It's so funny. I'll share a real quick story, and then we probably have to wrap up.
We should wrap up. We could talk
all night. But I was working in an organization as a trainer in this organization, and they pulled us all together for a development day, and it was all about what was possible for the organization. And we got into this whole, they took us through this process about how we could all do these micro projects that would benefit the organization. And we loved the staff. There's like 100 of us or something. We pretty much liked the organization and all of that. But we got in this conversation with them where people started asking that, like, okay, so you want us to do this work and do these micro projects for you. Most of us make our living in addition to training for you as consultants, and we get paid hundreds of dollars an hour to do this. So people were asking, like, who benefits if we do this? Are you going to give us shares in the organization? Or
equity. I've had this whole breakthrough about equity. I started thinking things like, wait, whose equity am I building here?
Exactly. And what was fascinating, I was just reflecting on this with a friend who was there, because this was a few years ago, 10 years ago or something, that the leaders of the organization, just as we were asking these questions, and I think really from a curiosity, like trying to understand, like, okay, but is there a benefit? They just got more and more defensive. And in fact, one of them at one point just burst into tears, and and it never went anywhere, because the truth of the matter was they benefited. There was no benefit to us. And finally, one of the leaders said, well, if we make more money, we can give more scholarships. And we were just like, yeah, we're not buying that.
Oh my gosh, you just totally.
It was so manipulative. It was so manipulative. And they, I think, couldn't even see, because I think they felt like they kind of owned us. And we were standing up going, no, unless you can tell me there's some benefit to me, we're not doing this. Right. It was a big fail.
Yeah, and there's not mutual benefit, and mutual benefit is, but then there's a lot of nuance and lines inside of that. Yeah. I've been in a negotiation recently, and what I'm most grateful for now is I really do take my time, even when I don't feel like I have time. It doesn't matter. I take the time, like, okay, wait, is this really the right thing for me? Does this feel good? Does it look good? Does it smell good? What are the flags here? Like,
Yes, I
it's
get
like
you.
really, really take my time. And until it feels solid in my mind and my heart and my gut, I don't move. I don't move.
I think that is brilliant and brilliant advice. And I will tell you, when I'm working with people who are coming out of narcissistic relationships and they're starting, and maybe it's all resolved, a divorce or whatever, and they're starting to think, I kind of like to date again, but how do I be sure I don't just date another narcissist? That is
Exactly.
my number one piece of advice. You go really, really, really slow for two reasons. One, you're going to be clearer. And other is that if you're dealing with someone who is toxic, this is also true in the business setting, they don't want you to go slow, because if you go slow, you're going to see too much. So they want that decision right now.
Right.
They don't want you to think about it.
Yeah.
And so slowing it all down, if they get mad that you're slowing it down, that is such good feedback, because now you're not dealing with a good person if
Yeah.
they're mad that
There's
you're slowing.
something disingenuous there
Yeah.
in the situation. Yeah. I've teamed up with the Seek Safely organization, and
Oh, I
we've
love
started.
the seats. I love the seats.
I know they're so good educational programs. And we just launched our second Safe Practitioner workshop, like live interactive one, where we go through each step of the Safe Practitioner promises that they developed and look at them in action, in function. And that's one of the, you just outlined.
I
One of
I
the big
love
things
that.
is
And
I tell people, like, stop with nobody believes it anymore anyway. You have till midnight. There's a limited time. Like, only do that if it's like for reals. Like, it's for reals. Like, you really are going to close the program at midnight, or you
right,
really are, like, but think very carefully, because that as a tactic, doesn't work anymore because the market's savvy to it. And we're so overwhelmed with it anyway. Nobody pays any
right,
attention. So,
right.
but most of all, like, who are you as the practitioner, and what are you really offering?
And anything that's really good, we used to have that, get everybody to sign up right now, because if they go away and think about it, they won't sign up. And you're sort of like,
Right.
well, if that's the impact, that they go away and think about it and they don't sign up, then maybe we should look at either how we're communicating or what we're offering.
Right.
Right. And I have people, so I have to say, for Seek Safely, my organization, so my company is BEabove Leadership. We do advanced coach training in trauma, neuroscience. We signed the pledge and we have it on our website. And it's very, very, I don't want to do anything in my training that it has any sniff of abuse, manipulation, or anything. I really hold that. I always say,
We have to be careful, because what I've seen, the more I've gotten into this and teaching that, and it's been really great because we have people from all kinds of disciplines and coaching, plant medicine people, like from all kinds of different things. But I'm telling you, what I'm learning, if you don't take the time as a practitioner, particularly if, first of all, some of the most exploited people are the coaches and practitioners, because they're the ones that are buying constant
yeah,
certifications and trainings and yada, yada.
exactly.
And if you don't take the time to slow down and really discover what the dark side looks like in action, in function, and I'm still learning all the time. I'm like, wow. And I'm kind of funny because I'm like, oh, I just found a new way people are exploited. I actually get
New
kind
way to manipulate people. Well, one of the things that we do, so you're talking about taking your time. So one of the things I'm really aware of is I will have people say, your program has been on my list and it's the next thing I do. And that might be 2 years from now. And I say, that's great. Whenever you're ready,
right.
whenever it works for you, that's absolutely fine. And because I think the push comes from a scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
I want people to feel really comfortable when they come in. I want them to feel good about that this is the right next thing. And if I come from, no, you have to register now, we're only doing this now. First of all, it's a lie. And secondly, that's me living in scarcity. That's not
Right.
where I want to be.
Right.
So I have no problem with that.
Yeah, it's
The
not
other,
really an opening. Well,
no.
let's we're gonna wrap up this
Okay,
session.
sounds good.
We're gonna have lots more. I promise. I don't even think we got to half my list, but that was the list I had just for today, not the
Okay.
long list. But so I do really look forward to having you back, and
Love to.
also bringing you in on some conversations with some other guests and whatnot this year, and as we move forward. And so I just really appreciate your time. And where should, if folks wanted to connect with you, or is there anything that you would like us to know that about you and
Yeah, you can check out our website, which is BEabove, like be above the line, leadership.com. And then also the best way to connect with me, and I'm always up for this, is just reach out to me on LinkedIn. And that's a great place to have connection. I post a lot there. I'm a poet, so I've
I'm
been
loving
doing.
your poetry. I'm
Thank
on
you.
Facebook a little bit more than LinkedIn, although I'm learning about LinkedIn.
I do it on Facebook too. You can reach out to me on Facebook. And
Yeah,
as
I
long as
see
you're
it.
not trying to market, as long as you're not trying to market me, I will accept your request. I don't, if I feel like somebody's like a marketer, I'm like, no, but
I know, me too.
otherwise good. So that's a great way to connect as well.
Well, thank you so much for taking the
You're
time tonight. It took us a long time to get together, but it was worth it. And I look forward to many, many more. And
Yeah.
for those of you that are listening, I always want to remind you, if you are just waking up at 2 and realizing that maybe you've been in a relationship, whether it's a work environment, a personal development environment, an exercise, whatnot, religious environment that's been high control, where you feel like maybe there's something for you to investigate, learn, and heal, please check us out I love my Rachel Bernstein group. Actually, we do a combination of sort of therapeutic, because she has that therapeutic background, but also a lot of learning about how did we get here? How did these things happen? So
Mhm.
check out our healthy healing group. It's always noted in the show notes. And to learn more about or continue the conversation with Confronting the Line, you can go to my book website, isthisoccultbook.com. And if you want to continue the conversation, we're kind of loading that up with resources and links and places, not just for us, but for our guests. And I just really appreciate everybody, not just Ann, but everybody taking the time to be with us today and to listen to this conversation. More to come.
Yeah. Thank you, Anne.